It's not always sudden. Sometimes it's a slow fading, like watching your reflection dim in a mirror that no one seems to look at anymore. You walk into a room and no one turns. You speak, and the conversation moves past you. You offer advice, and it's brushed off like a leaf in the wind. This isn't about vanity, it's about visibility. And for many people over 60, over 65, it becomes a quiet ache, the feeling of becoming invisible. Welcome to True Senior Wisdom, a space where we give voice to what's too often left unspoken, where the quiet truths of aging are shared, honored, and held with care. In today's video, we're going to explore a deeply emotional and often overlooked topic. Why do so many older adults feel invisible, even within their own families, communities, or friendships? And more importantly, how do we begin to reclaim a sense of presence, respect, and self-worth without shouting, without demanding, and without losing our grace? Because while the world may look past you, you must never forget how deeply you matter. Let's begin. Sign number one, your opinions are dismissed or spoken over. You're mid-sentence in a family conversation and someone changes the subject. You offer a story, a suggestion, a piece of hard-earned wisdom, and someone replies, "That's not how we do things now." It happens slowly. A little interruption here, a joke at your expense there, a sense that your thoughts are outdated, unnecessary, even inconvenient. And after a while, you stop speaking up. You tell yourself they don't mean anything by it. You smile, you nod, you shrink. But inside, something dims. This is one of the first signs of emotional invisibility, when your voice is no longer treated as valuable. In our youth-centered culture, there's an unspoken message that old means less relevant, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Older adults carry decades of perspective, patience, lived experience, and moral clarity. To dismiss their input is to lose sight of wisdom in its ripest form. When your words are overlooked, it's not your value that's diminished, it's the listener's ability to receive. It says more about their awareness than your worth. And over time, when this pattern continues, you may start to question your own voice. You begin to ask yourself, do I have anything worth saying? That question alone is a wound, one that silences more than just speech. It silences spirit. But the truth is, your voice is still powerful, even if it shakes, even if it's slower now, even if it holds more pause than punch, it holds something even rarer, wisdom. And that wisdom is more than memory. It's intuition, it's discernment, it's the ability to see through noise and name what truly matters: love, patience, forgiveness, values. In a world that runs faster, older voices offer what the world lacks: perspective. So, how do we respond? Not by yelling, not by pushing back in frustration, but by reclaiming your voice through intention. Speak with presence, not volume. Sometimes quiet confidence speaks louder than force. Choose your moments. Offer stories that connect to what's being discussed and give them time to land. Make eye contact. Touch a shoulder gently. Let people feel your calm authority. Reaffirm your story to yourself. If no one listens, write it down. Whisper it to the mirror. Speak it out loud to your memories. Your words matter. Join or create spaces where age is respected: community centers, book circles, spiritual groups. Sometimes your voice simply needs a new room to echo in. And most of all, don't stop speaking just because they've stopped listening. Sometimes a voice doesn't change the room, it changes the one heart that was ready to hear it. That is enough. Your voice deserves to be heard. Even if only one person listens today, speak with the strength of every year you've lived. The world may be louder now, but wisdom doesn't need noise, it needs courage. And you still have plenty of that. So speak, even when it feels like no one is listening. Speak, not to convince, but to remain whole. Speak, because the quietest voice still carries weight when it tells the truth. And one more thing: if no one around you seems to make space for your words, then you make space for them. Give yourself the gift of hearing your own story. Write your memories. Speak your prayers aloud. Read your poems back to yourself. Let your words remind you of your worth, because when no one else listens, you still can. And that is power. In the next section, we'll explore another quiet way invisibility shows up, through how people treat your time and presence. Because when people begin to overlook your boundaries, it's often a sign they've forgotten your worth. But you haven't, and that's where your power begins. Sign number two: your time and presence are taken for granted. There's a subtle kind of disrespect that doesn't come from raised voices or sharp words. It comes from assumptions. Assumptions that you'll always be there, that your time is less valuable, that you have nothing else to do. People arrive late to plans with you. They cancel last minute. They forget to call, forget to invite, forget to check in. And when they do show up, it's often with the attitude that you should be grateful for the attention, as if your worth is measured by how patient you are, not by how present you are. This is one of the most painful forms of invisibility, when your presence is expected but not appreciated. After 60, your time becomes more precious, not less. Every day is a gift. Every hour of energy is a choice. And every visit, every phone call, every shared moment is something you give. So when someone treats your time as though it's disposable, it's not just rude, it's a quiet erasure of your value. And yet, so many older adults tolerate this. Why? Because we're taught to be understanding, to be flexible, to be forgiving. We tell ourselves they're just busy. We make excuses. They didn't mean to forget. And slowly, we begin to expect less, to ask for less, to settle for crumbs. But here's the truth: you are not a backup plan. You are not an afterthought. You are not a placeholder in someone else's schedule. You are a full human being whose time matters, whose presence should be honored, not assumed. And let's be clear, honoring your time doesn't mean someone needs to roll out a red carpet. It means they show up when they say they will. They follow through on promises. They treat your presence as a blessing, not a convenience. Because when you've reached a point in life where your calendar is your own, your mornings are slower, your pace more mindful, interruptions sting more deeply, especially when they come from people who assume you'll simply wait. You've waited enough in life for recognition, for apologies, for others to value what you bring to the table. Now is the time to stop waiting and start choosing. So, how do you reclaim your presence? Start by noticing who respects your time and who doesn't. Speak kindly but clearly. It hurts when plans are broken without notice. Don't over accommodate. You don't have to rearrange your day for someone who doesn't do the same. Create your own rhythm. Fill your days with meaning, not waiting. And most of all, surround yourself with people who show up fully, not just when it's convenient. Build your own sacred spaces: a cup of tea alone in the garden, a quiet walk in the morning light, a group of friends who truly see you. These are the places where your time is honored. And when people realize they can't rely on your endless patience, they start to notice your boundaries. And through that, they begin to notice your worth. Because presence is a gift, and you've given it generously all your life. Now it's time for others to meet you there. And if they don't, that's not your failure. That's their blindness. You still shine, even when others forget to look. And one more thing, don't confuse being available with being valued. Your availability is not the same as your worth. Your calendar does not determine your dignity. You don't owe anyone your hours just because they assume you're free. You don't need to explain why your time matters. You only need to live in a way that proves it. You've earned your peace. Don't waste it waiting. From now on, give your time the same reverence you wish others would, because when you treat your own presence as sacred, others will learn to do the same. Sign number 3, they stop asking about your future. One of the quietest ways people disappear you is when they stop imagining a future that includes you. It's subtle. It's not that they say anything cruel, it's that they stop asking questions like, what are you looking forward to this year? Do you have any new goals? What's something you still dream of doing? Instead, the questions shift. How's your health? Do you need anything? Are you keeping busy? These questions aren't always unkind, but they frame you only in the present or the past, as if life has slowed so much that you are no longer on a path but parked, as if your story is over and what's left is just management. But you and I both know that's not true. No matter how old you are still growing, still becoming, still discovering new parts of yourself. You still have curiosity. You still have wonder. You still have choice. Just because your future looks different than it once did doesn't mean it's gone. It may not be about big moves or loud accomplishments, but the future is still yours to shape. A garden you've always wanted to plant, a letter you've always wanted to write, a person you want to reconnect with, a quiet dream you've never said aloud, a class you still want to take, a trip you've long imagined but never booked, a small habit you'd like to change, not to impress, but to feel proud of yourself, a new way of living that feels more peaceful, more spacious, more aligned with who you've become. And when people stop asking, you must begin asking yourself, what do I want this next season of life to feel like? Who do I still want to become? What part of me is waiting to be lived? What inner garden still needs watering? What dream did I tuck away years ago that might still be whispering? What kind of days make me feel alive, not just busy, but fulfilled? Because no one else can define what's ahead of you. That right belongs to you, and only you. And don't let anyone, including yourself, confuse aging with ending. You are still breathing, you are still choosing, you are still becoming. You don't need someone's permission to pursue what lights you up. You only need the courage to listen inward. So the next time someone speaks to you as if your future is behind you, smile gently, gently, and then say, actually, I'm still becoming because you are. And the story isn't done. Write down your dreams, revisit your ideas, make plans again, not just for others, but for you. You don't have to prove your life matters by doing something grand. You only have to remember this chapter is yours to write. It always was. And if no one else is celebrating what's ahead for you, then be the one who lights the candle, who lifts the glass, who honors the path that's still unfolding, because your future still matters, even if no one else is asking about it. Keep asking yourself, keep writing it, keep living like the best pages are still to come. Sign number 4, they speak about you, not with you. It begins subtly, in a room where others are talking and you hear your name but not your voice. They should probably rest more. He doesn't get out much these days. She used to love that before her memory started slipping. You're sitting right there, fully aware, still present, still listening. But instead of being included, you're being narrated. This is one of the most disheartening, farting forms of invisibility, when people start talking about you like you're no longer fully here, as if your thoughts, your preferences, your perspective are relics, not realities. They may mean well, they may think they're protecting you, but the effect is the same. You begin to feel like background noise in your own life. It's not just about conversation, it's about dignity. To be spoken with is to be acknowledged. To be spoken about while you're still in the room is to be erased. And this happens far too often to older adults, especially when their health changes or when families gather and assume they know best. You're still you. Your pace may be slower, your hearing a bit less sharp, but your presence is intact, and your right to participate in your own life is non-negotiable. And the silence that comes from being spoken around is different than solitude. It carries a sting because it doesn't come from absence. It comes from exclusion. You may laugh politely, brush it off, or pretend not to notice, but inside it hurts. Because deep down, every human being wants to be part of their own story, not just a footnote in someone else's version of it. It chips away slowly. You start talking less, participating less, then eventually believing less in your own right to be part of the moment. But invisibility is not a sign of age, it's a result of how others are choosing to engage. So, how do we shift this? Gently but firmly interject, I'm here. You can ask me. Make eye contact. Use your name and your story. You're not a subject, you're a soul. Share what matters to you before others decide for you. Speak about what you love, what you need, what you still enjoy. Encourage others to include, not interpret. And when needed, remind them, please don't speak for me. I'd like to share that myself. Because nothing builds disconnection faster than assumption, and nothing heals it quicker than conversation. If you've noticed this happening to you, don't shrink in silence. Instead, breathe deeply and say, I'd love to be part of that conversation. Or even, I'm not gone, I'm right here. Because you are. You are still the author of your story. No one gets to write it in the past tense while you're still living the sentence. And for those who love someone older, remember this: the greatest act of love is presence, not managing, not protecting, but inviting. Invite the older person in your life to share, to lead, to reflect, to guide. They don't need your assumptions, they need your attention. And if you're that person, the one being spoken around, let your voice rise. Even if it shakes, even if it interrupts, even if it's just a whisper, I still matter, I'm still here. And say it not just for others, say it for yourself, so your heart hears it, so your spirit believes it. Because being seen isn't a luxury, it's a human need, and it doesn't fade with age. It becomes more sacred. And if you've been quiet for too long, it's not too late to speak up again. Reclaim your voice, your place, your presence. Every word you speak now is a reminder. You are not done. You are not past tense, you are here, and you still deserve to be heard. You are still the author of your story. No one gets to write it in the past tense while you're still living the sentence. And for those who love someone older, remember this: the greatest act of love is presence, not managing, not protecting, but inviting. Invite the older person in your life to share, to lead, to reflect, to guide. They don't need your assumptions, they need your attention. And if you're that person, the one being spoken around, let your voice rise. Even if it shakes, even if it interrupts, even if it's just a whisper, I still matter. I'm still here. And say it not just for others, say it for yourself. So your heart hears it, so your spirit believes it. Because being seen isn't a luxury, it's a human need. And it doesn't fade with age, it becomes more sacred. And if you've been quiet for too long, it's not too late to speak up again. Reclaim your voice, your place, your presence. Every word you speak now is a reminder. You are not done. You are not past tense. You are here, and you still deserve to be heard. But you are not here for scraps of affection. You are not a charity project. You are a full human being with a heart still beating, still hoping, still deserving of real, meaningful connection. So, how do you reclaim your sense of relationship? First, trust what you feel. If something feels like obligation, it probably is. Stop begging for affection. Stop trying to be easy or uncomplicated just to earn a little more time. Make space for mutual energy. Invite people who want to be present, not those who feel obligated. And most importantly, fill your own life with meaning that doesn't depend on their presence. Reconnect with friends who make time, even if they live far. Sometimes a sincere voice across a phone line is warmer than an indifferent body across your table. Give more energy to those who see you, not just out of kindness, but because they value who you are now, not who you used to be. Go where you are celebrated, not just endured. And remember this: you are not a burden. You are a blessing. You are not a duty. You are a gift. If someone treats time with you as a chore, release them gently and pour that energy into someone or something that reminds you of your light. Because you deserve relationships that feel warm, not weighed down, where laughter isn't forced, where silence feels safe, where presence is a choice, not a calendar entry. You don't need dozens of people. You only need a few who truly see you, who show up because they want to, not because they have to. And if those people aren't in your life right now, start by becoming that person for yourself. Take yourself out, listen to music you love, write letters to the younger you, prepare a favorite meal, sit in the sun and say, I'm glad I'm here, because your life is not a burden, it's a light, and the right hearts will find their way back to it when they remember how much it warmed them. And if they never return, let that be your freedom, not your failure. You do not have to convince anyone to stay. You only need to honor the one who always has, you. Your presence is not a checklist, it is a gift, and it begins with you choosing to show up for yourself first. And perhaps the greatest relationship you'll ever rebuild in this chapter is the one with yourself, not out of loneliness, but out of reverence. Because when you treat your own soul with care, you remind the world how to do the same. If you felt any of these signs in your own life, being talked over, overlooked, or treated as a task instead of a treasure, know this: you are not imagining it. And more importantly, you are not alone. Invisibility is not just something that happens, it is something we slowly accept until we no longer do. This video wasn't made to stir resentment. It was made to stir remembrance of your voice, your presence, your sacred place in this world. After 65, after 70, after all the chapters you've already lived, you still get to write the next one. You still get to speak with clarity, set boundaries with grace, dream with softness, and love fiercely, freely, and without apology. You do not become less worthy with time. You become more rare, more radiant, more rooted in truth. So today and every day that follows, I invite you to come home to yourself, to your value, to your voice, to the wisdom you've carried, quietly, patiently, waiting to be heard. And if the world gets louder, more distracted, more dismissive, let your presence become quieter, deeper, unshakable. You don't need permission to be visible. You only need the courage to keep showing up for yourself because visibility is not something they give you, it's something you reclaim. With every breath that says, I am still here, I still matter, I am still becoming. Thank you for spending this time with us at True Senior Wisdom. If this video resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice could be the light someone else is searching for. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe, like, and turn on notifications. Because here, your story isn't over. It's just beginning again with grace.